So one of the things we got to think about is what are the different forms of tithing? So again, the book of Malachi is dealing specifically with the children of Israel. This is not dealing with the other nations. This is not dealing with America today. This is not dealing with anything that's happening right now. It's dealing specifically with the children of Israel. Another thing to understand is this idea of a contract, right? The contract, if like, for example, if me and you make a contract, if you disobey the contract, your family members are not going to be punished because the contract is between you and I. You know what I mean? So if the contract is between Israel and God, that means anybody after that is not going to be affected except for the children of Israel and God, right? Those who are keeping the contract. So I think that the idea here is to kind of walk along the lines of what are the different forms of tithing. So one of the ways that God required 10%, the tithe, was of land, basically the crops that grew. And the passage that you would go to would be Leviticus chapter 27 and verse 30. And he says, and all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. So he's asking for 10% of the crops that grow. That's what God is asking for. That's what tithing is being applied to. But then we also had animals. Animals were also part of that tenth. And if you go to Leviticus chapter 27 and verse 32, it states, and concerning the tithe of the herd or the flock or whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. So now we see that the 10th or the tithe is being applied to both the animals and the land or the crops. So far, no money has been involved. The 10% is dealing specifically with those things. So now what were the tithes for? Was it that he just wanted to randomly collect money, collect animals and food? No, it was for a specific reason. Right. So when you go to Numbers, right, Numbers chapter 18 and verse 21, we have an idea what the tithes were for. Right. So it says, behold, I have given the children of Levi. Notice that the tithes are being given to the children of Levi, the Levitical priesthood. He says, behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance in return for the work which they perform, the work of the tabernacle of meeting. So now the land and the crops and the animals, how people ate and took care of themselves, these things were given to the Levites. Now, the reason it was given to the Levites, because number one, they were performing the work in the temple. They were taking care of the work, sacrificing the animals, doing all that work. Also, when you read in the Old Testament, you discover that a lot of the, actually all of the nation of Levi, the tribe of Levi, they didn't inherit any land, because their job was specifically to deal with the things of the priestly household. So what does that mean? Well, it means specifically that they weren't going to be able to go and work. They didn't have land to grow crops and food. So what did God do? Well, he took 10% from all of Israel who were given lands, and they took that 10% and brought it to the Levites so they would have enough food to eat and to take care of the necessities as far as food and things like that. Now, some people will talk about like, well, can a contribution, like remember in Malachi where we read about how have we robbed you, it says in tithes and offerings. So can an offering be money? Yes, but an offering can also be food as well. Okay, so let me give you an example. In Exodus chapter 30, verses 12 to 13, it states, when you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life. And to the Lord, when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in this census shall give this, half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. So here we figure out that, wait a minute, this is an offering and this is a contribution, but it's a census tax of the children of Israel. But notice, nowhere in the text did he say that it was 10%. The amount is actually given a shekel according to the household, or half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. So, if we go through Deuteronomy chapter 14, I think this will be another one that we can actually expound on. What do you think? You think we should go into Deuteronomy 14 just to kind of expound on these other points?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So Deuteronomy 14 verses 22 to 27 actually describe the tithe. Like, so what will happen is individuals will take certain passages and try to kind of magnify them and say, look, it's only about money. So Deuteronomy 14 verses 22 to 27 states, you shall truly tithe of all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year. So notice the tenth or the tithe is immediately attached to field and grain, things that were produce, and they were supposed to tithe of that. Verse 23 says, and you shall eat before the Lord. So here in Deuteronomy 14, we discover that tithing, the tithe was to be eaten before the Lord. And then he said, and so now he's about to give the location as to where it's supposed to be. He says, in the place where he chooses to make his name abide, which was Jerusalem. So the food was to be eaten before the Lord, the tithe. Then he goes into describing the tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. So this is tying directly to what Leviticus was talking about. It's about food and animals. That's what the tithe was applied to. He said that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But then in verse 24, he says, but if the journey is too long for you so that you are not able to carry the tithe. So notice, now there's an implication that there is an issue, right? He creates this problem scenario. What if the journey from where you live all the way to Jerusalem is too long for you to carry the tithe? So, for example, many individuals had great herds and great flocks. Imagine if somebody had a huge farm and huge farmland and their 10% was like thousands of pounds. There is no way that they're going to be able to take that and carry it all the way to Jerusalem. So God shows you this problem scenario, and then he's going to tell you how to solve it. And I think this is what's very important. He says, but if the journey is too long for you so that you are not able to carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, when the Lord has blessed you, then you shall exchange it for money. And this is very important because he just showed you that the tithe is not money because you have to exchange the tithe for money. Okay, very important. Then he says, take the money in your hand and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses. Now, some people take this passage and see, well, we don't have animals, so now we have to give money. But that's not what the text is saying, because look what happens with the tithe after it's converted to money. And he says in verse 26, and you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires. So some people say, oh, you see, whatever, you can spend this money on whatever you want. But no, he gives you the kind of framework or the stipulation as to what the tithes are supposed to cover. He says for oxen or sheep, for wine or similar drink, for whatever your heart desires, you shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. So now what happens is they had all these crops and animals. They converted it to money in order to go over to Jerusalem. Then they take that money. Do you think that they give the money to the priests? No, they're not giving the money to the priests. They then buy the food that is required for the feast days and things like that and they convert the money back to food so they can eat it before the Lord. Verse 27, it says, you shall not forsake the Levite who is within your gates, for he has no part nor inheritance with you. So you see, the tithe was for the Levites to take care of them and to make sure that they had enough to eat. So immediately we see the tithe in Deuteronomy 14 is actually separated from